For every great story, there's a great hero. Behind every great hero, there's a great villain. And behind every great villain, there's online message boards trying to argue that the great villain actually isn't all that bad. He's actually way cooler than the great hero, and then some odd years down the line, that villain gets their own spin-off series / redemption arc that turns them into an anti-hero, so now you don't have to feel bad about liking them, despite the heinous things they've done. But not all villains or antagonists have to be some elaborate, monologuing megalomaniac with mommy issues. Sometimes they're just creatures. Creatures that are in your way and that you gotta overcome if you want to complete your goal, usually by killing them. Much like great villains, great monsters can make for some incredibly memorable experiences in a game, both good and bad, whether it be because they're fun to fight or because they look really freaking cool. A good host of monsters in your game can really enhance the experience and make for one hell of a good time. So that's why, for this year's annual spooky holiday, I've decided to make a short list of some of my favorite and most memorable monsters in video games that I've encountered. No, these aren't my scariest, hardest, or whatever else. They're just monsters that I like a lot. So here they are, in no particular order. I feel like I have to preface every single scary or monster video about Mario 64 with this message. No, I'm not talking about this thing. The Mario series is without a doubt the most iconic and most influential video game franchise ever made, to the point where even people who don't play video games can recognize both the Italian plumber and his supporting cast at first glance, which includes his classic monster gallery. Sure, your grandma probably won't know what a Koopa Troopa is by the name alone, but if you point out that they're the foot soldiers of the great and mighty Bowser who vows to take over the Mushroom Kingdom, she's probably still not going to know what the hell you're talking about. Read the room, kid. Call it a turtle and help your gran out. You owe her that much. One of the coolest things I've always found about Mario 64 was that most stages had their own unique enemies in their layout. There were a few that got reskinned or just flat out reused in later levels, but otherwise just about every stage had some sort of unique enemy native to it that helped make each setting feel special. My favorite and most memorable enemy from 64, however, came from the very first playable stage, Bob-omb Battlefield, and it was the Chain Chomp. The Chain Chomp is a giant spherical maw of teeth that was first introduced in Super Mario Bros. 3 and definitely lives up to its namesake. It's got a chain, it goes chomp, and what more do you really need? Well, perhaps the fact that it makes dog noises every time it attacks, and also is just shaped like a friend. I mean, look at him. Isn't he just the cutest, wooest little ball of death? Yes, he is. Oh, yes, he is. As a kid, I always found the Chain Chomp to be cool because not only was it just so drastically different than the other enemies in this opening stage, it was invincible. It was a living obstacle that you had to get around or else it would take off a huge chunk of your health. Other enemies had means to defeat them, but not the Chain Chomp. Instead, you just gotta avoid it until you figure out that you can actually free the big guy by stomping his peg where he's chained up into the ground. After which, he'll open the way to the star for you as a thanks, and flee, never to be seen again. Well, I say never, but actually Chain Chomps show up in just about every single major Mario game now to some degree. But even then, a lot of times they're still treated as some sort of obstacle to get around. Regardless, I love the Chain Chomp. It's still my favorite Mario enemy. And there are so many other good ones, and they're all beloved by the general populace to some degree. Almost a little too beloved if that whole Bowsette thing that happened a few years ago was anything to go by. X-Men 2 Clone Wars was one of my go-to childhood games that I occasionally go back to even now and still enjoy. It's also one of those games I played all the freaking time as a kid, but I don't know anyone else that actually owned or played it. Though that probably had to do with the fact that nobody else I knew owned a Sega Genesis. Being the only Sonic kid on the block was a lonely time, I tell you. I've already made a video talking about this game, but in case you need a refresher, it's a game about Marvel's X-Men warring against clones. 2. As you approach the end of the game, after passing what is no doubt the most brutal and difficult part of your final journey, these bugs! You find yourself face to face with your final challenge. Shall it be a member of one of the X-Men's extensive rogues gallery, or perhaps some sort of metaphorical representation of racism and bigotry that the X-Men also exist allegorically to combat? Nope! The answer is a giant scorpion queen that chases you down a hallway, screeching and firing lasers from her mouth, and the only way to defeat her is by punching her in her exposed brain cage when she rams against a wall, after which the chase continues and you lather, rinse, and repeat until her head explodes. If that sequence of events don't sum up what comics and comic book video games were like in the mid to late 90s, I'm not sure what will. The Brood Queen was one of the most memorable bosses from my childhood games. She was this giant, horrible creature that chased after you relentlessly while making this horrible sound. A sound that you actually got to hear in the previous stage, but with no context. At that point, you're probably thinking, oh God, what is that? Am I gonna have to fight that? Oh, hell no! Very few of the other bosses get that sort of mysterious foreshadowing. Most of the time, you're just told right away which enemy you're going after, whether it be the Sentinels, Magneto, or Oscar Isaacs. But while you know that you're fighting the Phalanx directly in this final stage, you're probably not entirely sure what final form the boss is going to take. So when this giant H.R. Giger scorpion comes barreling down towards you, your first response is probably going to be, holy shit! The Brood Queen isn't a hard boss. Hell, she's not even the true final boss. After you make her head explode in a brief victory fake-out, her claws come barreling down the hall towards you and turn into clones of whatever characters you're controlling at the moment. Then, you gotta run around and have a Mega Man-style boss rush after you defeat all the clones of your team. What? You thought a game called X-Men Clone Wars wouldn't have you fight clones of the X-Men? Well, if that title was somehow too subtle about explaining the premise, then the title of this next game is also sure to throw you for a loop. I didn't get into Monster Hunter until it came to the Wii U with Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, and what surprised me more than anything was how hooked I got on that game. To this day, it is one of the few games I've actually sat and played for 10 hours straight, at least once. And with so many different kinds of monsters and variants of those monsters to hunt, it really is the kind of game that can get you hooked for hours on end. The monsters all come in their own species category, even if those species don't always make sense. For example, the biggest and baddest monsters in the series are called Elder Dragons. These include your stereotypical looking dragons from myth and legend like the Fatalis, but that also includes other myth and legend creatures like lightning unicorns such as the Kirin. Anyway, one particular category is known as the Brute Wyverns, giant bipedal T-Rex looking monsters that were introduced in the 3rd generation. And this category also includes my favorite freaking monster in the whole series, the Brachydios. When the Brute Wyverns were created for Tri, there was one recurring design element that the team noticed, and that was that Brute Wyverns relied a lot on charging attacks and using their big ol' noggins. You know, because they were T-Rexes, so their primary weapons were their skulls and their tails, not their tiny little arms. So in 3 Ultimate, the updated re-release of Tri came about, Capcom decided they wanted to mix up the Brute Wyvern species a bit. Instead of making a monster built around charging and tail slapping, they made one built around punching. And not just punching, punching with slime. Slime that explodes. Enter the Brachydios, a blue behemoth that is so kick-ass that it has its own unique theme. The Brachydios' means of attack involve using its giant slime boxing glove hands to punch the ground to make slime pools that will explode after a few seconds. If you end up taking a punch yourself or move through the slime, you gotta start panic rolling like you're fighting a Dark Souls boss to shake it off. Otherwise, you're gonna be the bomb, yo. I think the coolest aspect of the Brachydios is just how it uses its longer arms for all of its movements. It's not only using those giant punchers for beating your face in, it's also using them to pivot on a dime, to move around the arena quickly to try and outflank you. It's a monster that's not only huge, but incredibly agile. And if you're not careful, you'll find your escape route cut off and explosive slime all over your body. It only gets harder when it enrages, where slime now completely covers its body and all of its attacks create instant and more powerful explosions. For added insanity, there's a version of the Brachydios called the Rampaging Brachydios that is permanently in this state, as if you need more of a reason to fear this thing. Though you have to wonder, how did it reach a permanent stage of rage to begin with? Well, perhaps being covered in all that slime makes it impossible for it to give or receive love. Honey, kids, I'm home. Now come over here and give your daddy Dios a hug. Oh god, not again! And yet, despite the chaos of this kind of fight, I find it to be so much fun. Maybe it's the bombastic theme playing the whole time, or how the Brachydios never really slows down. But fighting this monster is a blast, both figuratively and literally. I've been meaning to play more Monster Hunter World, but haven't really gotten into it. But hearing in passing that the Brachydios made a return in Iceborne was almost the sole reason to get me playing again. Also, the armor makes you look like a freaking Ava. I mean, come on, that's cool. Alright, before we wrap up this video, I wanted to do a few quick honorable mentions for this list. One of my other favorite monsters is Vicar Amelia from Bloodborne. She's basically a giant mutant nun deer wolf monster, which sounds like it should be an album name and she should be on the cover. She's an early boss in the game, and while not terribly difficult, her general vibe is just awesome. The only reason she doesn't get her own entry is because I felt like it was cheating to have two From Software creatures on the same list. I guess that's a spoiler for the final upcoming monster, but whatever. Here she is.
Yeah, let's give a quick shout out to
Vicar Amelia.
The other honorable mention doesn't go to a specific monster, but rather a category. In the game Xenoblade Chronicles 2, you traverse huge outdoor areas and encounter all kinds of exotic wildlife. Most of these creatures are going to be an average level to the zone, so it's not hard to tell if you're supposed to be there or not depending on how strong you are and what part of the story you're in. But some of these monsters don't play by the rules, instead appearing as a ridiculously high-level monster as early as one of the first zones that can potentially aggro you from across the map and murder you in one shot. A few of these enemies in the field are specifically designed to be optional mini-bosses, but something that stands out about them, besides their level and perhaps unique abilities, are their names. All these creatures have names, and not names like Brutalitus, Destroyer of Worlds. No, they have normal-ass names like Ted or Elizabeth. That alone would be hilarious in its own, but it only gets better because then those names have some sort of adjective in front of them. For example, the most memorable one to me is named Sad Bernard. I have so many questions for Sad Bernard. Who is he? Why is he so sad? Why does he have such a normal last name as Bernard? And who gave that to him? Well, perhaps these are mysteries best left unsolved. But oh lord, do I love Bernard. And also Soul Eater Stanley. Okay, so for this last one, here's a little creative writing/art prompt for you guys. You ready? If you decided to design a dragon that was so voracious that it just could not stop eating, and as such became a distorted version of itself, how would you design it? Would you make that dragon look really deranged but hungry? Would you make them really, really fat? Well, when From Software got this prompt, they decided that the answer would be that the dragon's entire upper half of its body would split open vertically and form into a gigantic abyssal maw of teeth. The Gaping Dragon is, in my opinion, one of the coolest designed bosses in Dark Souls that comes sandwiched in between two of the worst areas in the game. If you play your cards right, this is also probably one of the first real spectacle boss fights in the game. It's fought in this huge underground area with tons of space to move around, It truly represents the dark fantasy setting that Dark Souls is going for, with its design and implications of its origins. True, the boss fight itself is not terribly hard, at least not by the series' own standards. There's really only one attack that might give you trouble if you're not careful, which is where it vomits all over the ground and it covers a huge area, so it can be hard to get away from it. Or if you forget to deal with that pesky magic user enemy up above the arena, who will snipe you for the entire encounter if not killed beforehand, which can make the fight a real pain. But it's still a really freaking cool enemy. Not to mention that backstory I just gave about it being transformed by its own gluttony is kind of up in the air given how minimalistic Dark Souls' story is in general, which is pieced together by item descriptions and environmental cues. The Gaping Dragon is about as mysterious as any other Dark Souls enemy, but it doesn't make it any less awesome. And the design of this enemy is something I don't think that other Dark Souls games have managed to top, at least not in terms of uniqueness. So, those are just a few of my favorite monsters from games that I've played. I've got many more, but those are the ones that ended up on this list. Do you have any favorite monsters you want to gush about? Leave a comment about it. Maybe I've heard about it, maybe I haven't. Surprise me! And, as always, stay safe, wear a mask, the medical kind, and have a happy Halloween.
Thank you.